Well, one of the things on the minds of many, especially as we still, as an economy, suffer from historically high unemployment, is ultimately how do we differentiate ourselves from other candidates for jobs? With the job market as competitive as it is, it's extremely important that you have the ability to set yourself apart from the other people that are applying for jobs. Because unemployment is as high as it has been, you have a greater number of people competing for the actual just same job. And so because of that, we have to find a way to make ourselves stand out. And so what I'm going to do over the course of the next 10 minutes is simply outline some of the different things that we can do as job candidates in the interview process to set ourselves apart and make ourselves that much better. Remember, the whole purpose of an interview is for an employer to try and get an accurate representation of how you would perform on the job. And flawed as it may be, it is one of the common measures that employers use to select candidates. Generally, all employers have some type of face-to-face interview process as a way of selecting candidates because they can get an idea for ultimately your demeanor and personality and ask you obviously pointed questions related to how you've performed in the past and then draw conclusions on how you would perform at some point in the future, hopefully for their organization. So let's talk about some ways to actually differentiate yourself. The first one, and probably one of the most important things you can do ultimately, is prepare for this particular interview. The extent to which you prepare for the interview is going to have a reflection in terms of your confidence, meaning that the more that you prepare, the more confident that you're going to feel going into the interview. So, what are some of the things that we can do to prepare and make ourselves more confident, and thus we maybe reflect our true personality during that interview? One of the things that's extremely helpful is to generate a list of possible questions to essentially develop answers to already. And although you may not be able to get exactly what is going to be asked, you will at least have the ability to kind of think through ultimately how you would respond to those particular questions. And that's extremely important. You can look online and see kind of common questions, different types of questions that are asked, and develop responses to those. And although you might necessarily not receive that exact question, the process of developing a response is going to help you because you can use bits and pieces of the response you've developed in other questions. There's generally a lot of overlap, and there's not a whole lot that can be asked because an employer wants to get an indication of past performance and see if that's going to translate to future performance. And so stick to those areas and try and find out what are some possible questions. A great thing to do that you might want to consider is to see if you can maybe meet with a current employee and discuss the interview process with them. That will give you some better insight into ultimately what are the requirements of the job, so you have an accurate interpretation of what the job entails, and so you can tailor your responses because you know exactly what the employer is looking for. Another thing that you want to do is a little bit of research on this particular company. It's very important that you have some type of background knowledge. When they ask you ultimately why it is that you want to work there, you need to have a better response than, well, I need a job. Because ultimately the employer wants to make sure that you're going to be committed and there's something outside of simply receiving a paycheck that interests you with regards to the company. And if they can match that fit, that person and organizational fit, if they think there's a match there, then the likelihood that you would stay on board with the company is much greater. So make sure that you do some research. You know about the company, their products, their services, performance, different things, areas of opportunity possibly. If you want to tell them ultimately how you can positively impact them, you want to have a very tailored and succinct answer so that you can tell them what you bring to the table. How can you benefit them? Remember, that's what the employer is looking for, is how is this person going to benefit me as a company? And ultimately, I want to go with the individual who I feel is going to provide the most benefit based on the pay and benefits and things that I'm obviously going to be giving them. So outside of preparation, another important thing to do is the presentation piece. Ultimately how we present ourselves is extremely important in the interview. And what often happens is during the first 30 seconds or so, the interviewer is going to already formulate an impression about you, regardless if it's accurate or not. That's the process that we go through, and it's simply human nature to try and simply categorize somebody based upon what we perceive about them, and then obviously put them into certain buckets, which generally don't turn out to be true, but it's how we process things. And so knowing that, pay very careful attention to how you craft the presentation piece. The first thing is you want to be early. You don't want to arrive 30 minutes early, but you generally want to be 5 to 10 minutes early. You don't want to be excessively early, acting like you have nothing better to do, but you don't want to be, arrive right when the interview is supposed to start, or you don't want to arrive late for sure. That is the best way to get off on a wrong note, and that is a surefire way to get yourself weeded out of the selection process. So make sure that you're early. I encourage you to scout the location beforehand if you're not familiar with where the interview is going to take place. Maybe the day before, drive by, get a feel for the surroundings, where things are located. Not only is this going to help you find it much faster, but it's also going to put you at ease, kind of calm those nerves a little bit, which we all tend to feel when we're in an interview. And so it's going to put you at ease because you're going to be in familiar surroundings, and you're going to be aware of what's going on and where to find certain things. So it helps for those reasons. In terms of dress, you do want to dress professional. That should go without saying. In terms of the level of which to dress, it's not always appropriate to wear a suit in all interviews. What you want to gauge is, what is the dress like when you're normally at the job? And what you want to do is you want to dress one level above that. And so if you look around, when you're scouting ahead and getting a view for your surroundings, and you see that everyone is dressed in business casual, well, that would mean that for gentlemen, you would need to wear a suit, because that's one level above that. For ladies, obviously the appropriate level of dress as well, skirts and different things are very appropriate. If it's a construction type company, obviously you wouldn't want to show up in a suit, because they may get the impression that, well, this person doesn't really like to get dirty, they're a little too polished, maybe they won't fit in. But in that instance, maybe you wear simply business casual, maybe a pair of khakis and a collared shirt and the equivalent for a female. And so just one step above. Don't go overboard. Don't show up in a tuxedo or anything. That's way overkill. But you generally want to at least dress one level above what is present in the workplace there, just to set yourself apart a little bit. But don't go overboard. With regards to, I get questions all the time about perfume and cologne. I personally do not recommend wearing anything, because although it smells good to you or your spouse or significant other, you don't know if it's going to smell good to the interviewer. We have no idea who this person is. And so we're really taking a little bit of a gamble there with regards to selecting a certain type of perfume and cologne. And so I encourage everybody to just eliminate it entirely. Obviously, you should be showered and shaved and those things before the interview. But in terms of wearing cologne and perfume and different things like that, I would eliminate it altogether, because it's just something that may not provide that significant of a return. And it can certainly provide a very significant disadvantage, especially if the person has some type of aversion to whatever type of perfume or cologne that you're actually wearing. Important things. One, eye contact during the interview. You don't need to stare at the person directly in their eyes the entire time, because that can be a little creepy at times. But you do need to maintain intermittent eye contact. Make sure that you're looking somewhere at their face fairly regularly. Maybe not staring the entire time, but at least intermittent eye contact so they know that you're engaged. You don't want to slouch in your seat. You want to sit upright, maybe even a little more forward, to show that you're actively engaged in the conversation. No chewing gum, anything like that. That should be fairly standard, but I generally always get questions with regards to that. Another important thing is the handshake, and you really want to practice this, preferably with someone at home, until you get to the point to where you have a really solid handshake, not an overly firm grip to where you're literally breaking the person's hand. Obviously, that's not ideal, but obviously connecting webbing to webbing of the hands, and then a solid 1 to 2 pumps, maintaining eye contact throughout that entire process is very important. There are a lot of people in the interview process, interviewers specifically, that say they can judge a whole lot based upon a person's handshake. So you want to make sure that it's firm, not overly firm, certainly not limp, and make sure that you make eye contact throughout. 1 to 2 pumps, that's very important. One thing that I want to mention during the presentation process when you're actually interviewing is discuss salary. And this always comes up, is when's an appropriate time to discuss salary. And I personally think that if the employer does not bring salary up, I would not mention it. And the reason at this point is you're early on in the process. Right now, you don't have a great deal of leverage to be negotiating something like salary because they haven't yet formulated an opinion of you. Now, once the interview is done, once they decide that you are the person for the job and they cannot live without you, then you're in a position to actually negotiate salary. But early on in the process, it's only a deterrent, and it only signals to the employer that you're interested in the finance aspect, which is important. Obviously, many of us would not work if we did not get paid. That's not feasible. But at the same point in time, raising it as a significant issue early on can be a deterrent for the employer. And so bring it up on your own terms. If they ask, what are your salary expectations? It generally always is competitive based upon the job and things like that. But you don't have to directly answer with a specific number because, once again, that could weed you out too early in the process where you haven't yet built up the solid reputation for being a good fit for this particular job. And so that's very important. Try to avoid that, or at least deflect that if possible. Bring it up later when you have a little bit more leverage. The next thing you want to focus on is the follow-up, and this often gets overlooked. We go through the interview and we think, yeah, we did great, or maybe we didn't do so good, whatever the case may be, and then we stop at that point, and that's all that we do. It's really important to follow up on a consistent basis, not necessarily say, hey, I want a decision, tell me if I got the job, yes or no, but follow up with maybe just a thank you letter to the interviewer, just saying, hey, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to interview myself. And also, what you can do is take a few lines to reiterate some of the really positive qualities about you and why you would be good fit for the job. Maybe say, after the interview, I'm so encouraged that this is just a great fit because of such and such reasons, and I bring such and such skills and abilities to the table to make a positive impact. Once again, thank you so much for your time. Hope to hear from you soon. Maybe that won't be the difference between getting the job or not, but maybe it's just enough. Remember how competitive the job market is. If you're looking for just a little bit to separate yourself from someone else, that can be that difference right there. Maybe the interviewer is on the fence between a few candidates and you go above and beyond and send a thank you actual card to them outlining certain things, and they know, one, this person really wants the job, and two, they're reminded of all those good qualities about you. Maybe you interviewed first, and after 15 interviews, they've kind of lost you a little bit. They don't remember everything. So you taking the time to rehash some of those things, maybe they can recall the process and remember that, they did interview very well. They came off very polished. Let's bring them back for maybe a second or third interview, whatever the case is. So that's another important piece as well. What I also would encourage you to do is, in the event that, let's say, you don't get the position, which obviously isn't ideal, but we always want to look at these things as a learning opportunity. If you don't get the position for whatever reason, I would encourage you to contact the interviewer and ask them specifically, I feel like I would have been a good fit for this job. What were some of the things that I could work on to make me maybe a more solid candidate for this particular position? Or what was it that you saw that didn't make me necessarily the best fit? Maybe it's something that you can't change, but maybe it's something that you can. And maybe it's, maybe you just didn't address a particular question. Maybe you lack a certain area of experience, a certain educational background, whatever the case may be. The whole point is that with that feedback, you can now do something with it because it's actionable. On the other end, you would just get the standard letter saying, thank you for applying, thank you for interviewing, you're no longer moving on. That's not overly specific, and I don't know what to do with that. I don't know where to focus and where not to focus, essentially. So having that conversation with the interviewer is very positive because, once again, they know now this person's serious about working for this company, and maybe they didn't fit this particular job, but if another position comes around and they actually apply for it, I'm going to know that in the back of my mind that this person interviewed, did fairly well. There were a couple things, but they've worked on it, and they've actually put a good foot forward in those types of things. So I would encourage you to do that. It can be a little bit of an awkward conversation because generally it's hard to accept criticism, but there can be a lot of positive things that result from that. So hopefully that at least gives you a couple good things to key in on for the interview process. Hopefully that helps you differentiate yourself a little bit in that job market and ultimately excel in that interview and ultimately get that coveted position.